Rock Road Blues by Matt Woods.
Well, that hog dug all the way to China with a nose like an axe handle, son. I wish it'd stay fall forever. I could get a few more things done on this rock road. On this rock road.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. Well, man, we're rolling along. It's almost upon us. The general election 2020. We get to elect a president here November 3rd. And as we approach Halloween, I'm wearing my black and orange merch. As you can see, I got my Halloween look on here. But we've got a special guest today. It's Dr. Bob Leonard. This is going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's important to me. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of the beginning of my broadcast career. He's doing radio now in Indianola, Knoxville, Pella. And it's kind of the successor to the radio station that I started my career with, really, in Indianola, KBAB, back in 1977. But you know, as we approach this election, everybody's, of course, trying to project. Everybody's trying to predict what's going to happen, and everybody's using their different barometers. And, you know, one important barometer that oftentimes gets overlooked is yard signs. I mean, very few people talk about that. And Dr. Bob Leonard authored an article on that, and I wanted to get to him on that topic. But I want to start off a little bit by reading his biography, and he's got to suffer through this because the first time a guest appears on the show, I read the long form bio to let my readers know more about the interviewee. So, Dr. Bob Leonard graduated from Johnston High School in 1972. He received his BA in history from the University of Northern Iowa in 1977, and MA in anthropology from the University of Washington, Seattle in 1983. He received his PhD in anthropology from UW in 1986. He worked in historic preservation for the Zuni tribe in New Mexico in the mid-1980s. God, I love that. And then he accepted a position teaching in the Department of Anthropology at the University of New Mexico in 1987, where he taught until 2004. He and his family have lived back in Iowa in Marion County since 2004. Dr. Leonard's the author of dozens of scientific books, papers, and newspaper articles, as well as an unusual anthography of the taxi cab industry in Albuquerque. It was titled Yellow Cab, and it was a play based on the book that opened in May 30th of 2008 at the Adobe Theater in Albuquerque. It had 12 sold-out performances, and then they had a second version of that play. It was adapted for the stage in Pella, and it was performed at Central College and at the Des Moines Social Club in October 2020. So if you can imagine that, this guy's a playwright as well. He has contributions in the volumes Letters to a Young Iowan and Iowa, The Definitive History, Classics and Contemporary Readings by Iowans About Iowa. He's also written for the Wapsipinicon Almanac, Edible Iowa, Salon.com, and The Hill. Now get this, he's also written several pieces for the New York Times. So this guy's paid attention to not only locally, but across the country and in the venerable New York Times. He's got a new work, Deep Midwest with Ice Cube Press. It's a collection of poetry and essays. And as I mentioned, he right now is the special news editor for KRLS Radio in Knoxville and Pella, where he coordinates news as well as hosts special programming in the Daily News and Public Affairs program In Depth. Dr. Leonard, I mean, that's a long bio, but it's great stuff. And like I tell my listeners all the time, the reason that I read these things is if you're going to do all this stuff in a lifetime, all this admirable work, you got to talk about it once in a while. So we'll do it here to introduce you to the podcast by George audience. Welcome in.
Well, thank you. You make me sound really old, though, all those early days. Still young at heart.
We're the exact same age almost. I mean, our careers kind of started at the same time, and it makes me think, my God, have I wasted my time compared to what you've accomplished? But anyway, let's get into this now. I want to talk about these signs, and I'm going to put up here on the screen a couple of things, and these are just things that I have seen on my bicycle. The videos, images of huge flags. Now, these are Trump, Pence flags and signage, and the thing that struck me about it when I look at it, maybe it's because I'm a cheapskate, but I look at that and I think, my God, the money that was spent on these things and the commitment that it takes by somebody to put these signs up, to raise these flags, put the flagpoles in the ground and all that, it's really impressive. And reading your article, you would agree, I think, that that's a big part of this, the commitment that it takes by somebody to put a sign, even a small sign, in the yard.
Well, yeah, you have to get the sign. You've got to put it up. You've got to decide that you want to go public with your endorsement, tell the whole world who you're going to vote for. And it's out there. Unlike a lot of the other things that we do in a democracy, we vote in private. Nobody has to know who we vote for. Nobody has to know what we really think about anything. But with the yard signs, the political yard signs, you're really making a statement, and your friends and neighbors can see who you support. And sometimes it's an important endorsement, especially for people that don't, pay a lot of attention to politics. If so-and-so on the corner is endorsing that candidate, well, maybe I will too.
You're right. That before the 2016 elections, the only political yard signs for president I remember seeing on these routes that you frequent were Trump signs. And you said that you actually saw more Hillary for prison signs than Hillary for president. Now, it's kind of funny, but it really is significant. And I'm reminded of another author that you're well familiar with, I'm sure, Matt Taibbi with the Rolling Stone. And he had gone out on the campaign trail and kind of walked into it blindly. And he was really impressed by what he saw when he went to the Trump rallies, because he thought, having read his peers, basically, some people would call it the corporate press, that it was just a small gathering of nuts, basically. And he started going to these rallies, and my God, he said, you might think that they're nuts, but there's a lot of them, and they're really committed. So he was seeing the same kind of thing back in 2016 that you were, and he said he knew at that time that something was off. The polls weren't correct, just based on what he was observing, and I get a sense that you saw that as well.
Oh, yeah, the Trump rallies were incredible. I mean, agree with him or not, they're just brilliant. And the people are all caught up in it. He energizes them. He makes them feel powerful and appreciated. And he's a master showman. He's a lot better in person than he is on TV, especially amongst the people that he knows love him. And the energy is electric. Just watching it happen is incredible, but standing in the concession lines and talking to people is fascinating as well. And the things that they will say to you when they think you're one of them.
Well, as you mentioned in your article, some people will say, yard signs are not that important. Yard signs don't vote, but they don't vote, but you kind of disagree with whether or not they're significant.
Well, yeah, they're very significant. A buddy of mine, maybe I shouldn't mention his name, who's pretty high up in the party, great organizer in the Democratic Party. He says political consultants don't get paid for yard signs. They get paid for, media placements, for all kinds of other things, but they don't make a nickel off of yard signs. And so they're not going to push for yard signs. And yard signs are of absolute critical importance.
I'm struck by the fact that I follow these blogs and Facebook pages, and people are clamoring for yard signs. They're kind of difficult to get. And I look at that and think, my God, I think I saw something recently that said $11 billion is going to be spent on this election. Why would there be any difficulty in obtaining a yard sign? They don't have any trouble buying television time and web ads, because I'm perusing the internet. My God, we are drowning in that stuff. But yeah, that must have something to do with why yard signs are a little more difficult to come by.
Well, yeah, there are people, this kind of election and the caucuses and things like this are just, there's this cottage industry of political consultants, some of them who've never even been to Iowa, telling candidates what to do in Iowa. For example, whoever's tells a candidate that they don't have to go to every county if you're running for a statewide audience doesn't really know Iowa, because we want to see everybody. And so, yeah. And I've been in offices where, county offices where people come in looking for yard signs and they don't. Here in Marion County, the county took it up on themselves to pay for their own Biden-Harris yard signs because they weren't forthcoming from the Biden-Harris campaign.
And I think maybe here in the Heartland, which is where my podcast originates from, and I talk about that all the time, I think yard signs may take on extra significance out here in the hinterland. And I don't know how to describe this exactly, but you have areas that are kind of hard to reach yet are extremely significant because the rural states are kind of overweighted as far as the Electoral College is concerned. That's what people say. This rural vote is extremely important, and it has great influence on people when they go down the road or down the highway and they see great big signs like what I was talking about, or these great big flags in people's yards, particularly if they're well-respected and particularly if they're affluent. People look at that and they think, well, that candidate works for them. Maybe that candidate would work for me as well.
Well, absolutely. It's an important kind of endorsement. And one of the things that I looked at the scientific research, and the scientific research shows that yard signs matter, but I think they matter more in rural America because from where I live, I've got a 20-mile drive to anywhere. To the grocery store, I can go to Albia, I can go to Oskaloosa, I can go to Knoxville, I can go to Pella, but I've got a 20-minute drive. And in a big city, if you drive for even a minute, you're overwhelmed with text, you're overwhelmed with messages. And the way that our eyes work and our brains work, is we're drawn to text and we read it. The first thing I did was when we started looking at each other, I'm looking at what's behind you, I'm reading what's on your shirt, you're reading your map. And so we're drawn to text. On my 20-mile drive, if there's not much text, there's road signs, an occasional sign for saying what, type of corn is being used. And so you're drawn to it and you think about it, you look at what the person's car is like, what their house is like, whether or not you know them. If I see 5 yard signs in farmers' yards that all say the same thing, it tells me who farmers are backing. So it's even more important in the countryside than in the big cities.
When you ride around and you see a guy that's got a tractor big enough to block out the sun and, grain bins the size of small skyscrapers, and he's got big Trump signs out in his yard, or Biden signs, we should say, as well. I guess that would have an influence on somebody that maybe is starting out in farming or maybe isn't doing as well. They'd look at that again and think, it works for them. Well, I also thought it was interesting because I see a lot of this on the web also. People stealing and vandalizing signs. And you actually devoted a small section of your article specifically to that.
Well, yeah, there's one of those big signs that you were talking about, and it's just south of Attica, which is an unincorporated town, about an hour's drive southeast of Des Moines. And somebody put up a Trump sign that said, Trump Pence 2020, no more BS. Only it's spelled out BS. And so that was sort of stunning to me. And, I'm a dad and a grandpa, and I'm thinking if my kids are young enough, how am I explaining that to them? And so I was sort of thinking, that's just sort of outside the box to me, but apparently that's what we do now. But then what happened was it was then graffitied, and there was sort of this little war going on with this sign. And it was somebody posted on something like Love and Peace, spray painted across it. And then somebody came back and put on another Trump sign. It's something different. And then, there were a variety of iterations. And finally, somebody put up this sheet metal, maybe off of some kind of a machine shed or something. And it was painted black with yellow lettering, and it said, "Love one another, John 15." And so it's sort of, that hasn't been taken down. So they sort of peacefully coexist. Somebody dropped in a Joni Ernst sign. But so it's sort of stabilized there. But driving back and forth every day, it was fun to watch what was happening. And one time I saw this guy coming out to tend to, I don't know what he was doing, but it was like a flashback to, I don't know, whenever guys walked around in shorts and boots and a big mullet. And so, I mean, the mullet was incredible. And it was fun. It was great fun. And I decided to have fun with it. And one of the points of the piece, maybe you were going to get to this, but I want to make sure we do, is that the Biden signs have started popping up.
Yeah.
I was looking for a long time that it was just going to be Trump, 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 Trump all across rural America. And so, or rural Iowa, where I drive anyway. And so I just wanted to point out that Biden's making a run at rural Iowa. And to me, that's interesting. Like Biden or Trump, whatever, doesn't really matter. It's still a phenomenon that we can see.
Well, and the critical thing about that, as you mentioned earlier, in 2016, you didn't hardly see any of that. The Clinton signs did not appear. They are appearing now, and that may be indicative of something. I think these signs may be far more important than Russia or Russian memes on Facebook in influencing the electorate, particularly down home on the farm. Well, and I love having you on the podcast here, and I want to kind of put in a marker here to try to get you back on a future show. But I did want to mention just briefly, one of the appearances that you made that I saw most recently is on Iowa Press. And I was struck by your description of the electorate as far as the polarization. You have the Democrats, obviously, and the Republicans kind of equally split in their hatred of one another. Maybe you could explain that further. But the point that I've been making to people on my podcast, I think the people on the right, even the extreme far right, have been satisfied, and they are in the Trump camp. That's where they are at. The Democrats have decided to push away the progressives and the left, and they've decided that they're going to try to win by wooing some dissatisfied Republicans out of that camp and winning in the margins here, and it's going to be very narrow. It has to be, and it's particularly frightening because of the Electoral College, which is skewed in favor of the Republicans. So even though the Democrats won by 3 million votes in 2016, here in 2020, they may win by 5 or 6 million votes, but it still could be very close because of that Electoral College. And it kind of ticks me off, and I've talked about it on the podcast a lot because I'm a lefty, and I'm thinking, my God, those people that don't vote, that aren't in one of these two camps that are almost twice as large, the left, they didn't offer those people anything to come down into this Democratic camp. They weren't going to go to the Trump side. They're sitting there waiting for things like Medicare for all and legalized marijuana and free education and a UBI and a pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And the Democrats said, no, we're not going to do any of that because we don't want to alienate what we've got. And we're going to fight it out for these few thousand votes in these Rust Belt areas. And in some respects, here in the Heartland, in farm country. Do you agree with my analysis?
Well, I think that at least here in Iowa, the Democratic Party neglected the rural part of the state for a long time. I talked to Chuck Grassley. I've talked to him once a month for 16, 17 years. When Tom Harkin was senator, he would come the week before the election, and that was it.
Wow.
And so you've got Grassley doing 99 counties. You've got Joni Ernst doing 99 counties. You show up, you show you care. And if you don't show up, I mean, you feel neglected. It's, I don't know. I don't know why that strategy. That's probably what the highly paid consultants from the East or West Coasts are telling them what to do.
Well, take that another step now. 'Cause I hear that all the time also. Here's another bitch that I have that I bring up on the podcast all the time. U.S. senators in particular, I want them to have a worldview also. Maybe first and foremost. And a guy like you now that's worked with Native Americans and in the Southwest and that type of thing, I know you've got a worldview perspective. Does it kind of... It really grates on me that people want us to believe that an election is going to turn on whether or not somebody visits 95 counties or 99 counties and talks to people solely about what's of interest to them, or not solely, but I think predominantly on a very local level. That bothers me. Does it bother you at all?
Well, I guess not, but I'm biased because I love seeing the candidates come. I want to talk to everybody. But the thing is, unless they talk with us, they don't know what the issues are. And it's like, what do I know about New Hampshire? I don't know anything about New Hampshire. Let's say I'm a presidential candidate. I better learn something from New Hampshire, and I better learn something from people from New Hampshire, and not just my consultants. That's why we got to, when they come to Iowa, they want to learn about Iowa. When they go to South Carolina, they need to learn about that. Senate candidates that you mentioned, if you're going to be a senator for Iowa, you need to visit and talk with Iowans. I learn more from talking to people from different ways of life than, well, you know how it is. You talk to people and it's just incredibly informative. It forms and shapes your worldview. And what I really like to do is to talk to people that don't share my worldview and try to understand where they're coming from. One of the things that happens a lot of times is that people from the coast think that they have an idealized version of what Iowa's like we're all farmers and it's all, Madison Avenue produced photos of freshly scrubbed kids on nice tractors, or a bunch of hicks, and we're a bunch of idiots. It's one of the other, especially the East Coast and West Coast people think my Republican friends are dim bulbs, but they're not. They're smart people. They just have a different worldview. And I want to understand that worldview and figure out why my smart friends think differently from what I do. And I don't know. And I think that on the campaign trail, that makes a better candidate and it makes a better senator, president, whatever.
My God, we could talk for several hours probably, but especially since we're a couple of radio guys. And I do want to get you back on this show in the future. But to wrap up here again, just based on your take, and I think you were on it in 2016. And I mean, you can't judge by everything, and maybe you can't judge most of what's going on by yard sign, certainly. But what's your feel now as we come up to November 3rd, 2020? Do you have a different feel for what's going to happen?
Oh boy, I was afraid you were going to ask me. So I'll preface what I have to say with anybody that tells you that they know what's going to happen is either a liar or a fool.
Exactly.
I mean, I could say what I think, but maybe I'm being foolish. I think it's going to be tight. And you remember in 2016, there was a lot of talk about Trump shy voters, people that were for Trump but didn't want to tell anybody.
Yes.
Everybody. In rural Iowa, it's sort of tough. It's easy to be a Trump supporter. You walk around; these guys walk around in their MAGA hats like Randy Peacocks. They're proud to be Trump supporters. Now this year, I think we're going to have some Biden shy voters, people that are sitting at the coffee shops, in the bars, having beers with their buddies or friends or whoever. And I don't think they're telling everybody. And so Trump's base is strong. It's always going to be strong. There's going to be people worshiping him at his gravestone for generations, probably.
Yes.
But we'll have to see if the Biden voters come out, the Democrats are organized. I think the difference this time around is going to be the Biden shy voters, at least in rural Iowa. But then if rural Iowa is in play, and it is, so is the rest of the Midwest is in play. And so we'll see. I don't believe the polls, but it's going to be the energy amongst the Dems is incredible too. And the organization that, for example, Sean Bagnuski is, and all the people that work with him, he spreads the credit all around. And Polk County is just incredible. And what I'm hearing in Lynn County is the same, Johnson County. So we'll see if if those major metropolitan areas carry it all, and see what the rural Biden shy voters have to say.
Agreed. The only reason it wouldn't be just razor thin margins is if the turnout is extremely huge, and what we're seeing early is indicative of a much larger turnout, maybe on the level of 2008 or even before then, because these people that have refused to vote now in 2012 to a certain extent, and certainly in 2016, if they're motivated to come out and vote, and they vote Democrat, which is what I think that they would do, I think it'll be an easier win for Biden than some people think. But they may sit on the sidelines too, because I don't think the Democrats offered them much. But that's my take on it. And again, I wanted to have your perspective. And we definitely are out of time. Anything here in closing on your first appearance on Podcast by George that you want to talk about or mention that I didn't get to?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. And anybody that hasn't voted, please go vote.
Yeah, that's well said. Folks, that's Dr. Robert Leonard. He's a political commentator, an author, a playwright, my God, an anthropologist. I mean, and I'm just delighted to have him on Podcast by George. And if you enjoy our episodes, if you like the show, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow us on iTunes, all of the various platforms, Spotify, iHeartRadio app, Stitcher, all of those places where podcasts are seen or heard. But that's going to do it for now. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.